In the year 1872, atop a rugged peak in the Appalachian Mountains, a seemingly impregnable fortress was breathing its last. This was no mere stronghold. It was the Roost, the Eagle's Nest, the headquarters of a clandestine organization that for over 150 years had cast a long shadow across the burgeoning American frontier, instilling a unique brand of fear. The people within were not ordinary soldiers. They were the Shadows, known in hushed whispers across the developing nation as the Reapers, a cult of assassins. And today, they were to face an enemy against whom their legendary methods of elimination were utterly useless. The United States Cavalry, under the command of General Ulysses S. Grant, was on the march, and they were not playing a game of eliminating one man at a time. They were decimating entire populations. This is not just a story of war. It is about how a sophisticated, clandestine strategy clashed with overwhelming military might. It is about how an even greater terror crushed an empire built on fear, a collision of two opposing philosophies of conflict. One side believed in the power of shadows and daggers, the other, in the power of daylight and superior force. And most importantly, it is a story of how history spares no one who refuses to change when the world around them has transformed. However, to understand why the Union Army was so determined to obliterate the Reapers with such ferocity, we must rewind 166 years to when a man named Jedediah Thorne first entered the Roost and began to write one of the darkest, yet most captivating, chapters in American history. This is a story of power, strategy, faith, and collapse. Of people making choices in the harshest of historical circumstances. Before we continue, let me know where you are watching this video from and what time it is for you. Drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious to see where this story reaches across the globe. Perhaps you are in New York. Perhaps you are somewhere far away. Wherever you are, this story of clashing civilizations holds valuable lessons. And here's a question you'll need to remember until the end of the video. Did the Reapers dig their own grave with the very tactics they so perfected? Or was it simply an inevitable fate when a small power stood against the most formidable empire of its time? Or is this truly a story of a world that changed while they failed to adapt in time? To truly understand the Reapers, we must understand the world that birthed them. The late 18th century was a particularly chaotic period in early American history. The fledgling United States, once united in revolution, had fractured into numerous, often feuding, states and factions. This was not merely political conflict. It was a deep ideological schism between those who favored a strong, centralized federal government and those who championed states' rights and agrarian ideals. This division, born from the very founding of the nation, revolved around the fundamental question of who had the right to lead the new republic and shape its destiny. The Federalists believed a strong central government was essential for stability and prosperity. The Anti-Federalists, or Democratic Republicans, believed that power should reside with the individual states and the common man, fearing the tyranny of a distant federal authority. But even within the anti-federalist camp, there were further divisions. In the 1790s, following the death of influential figures like Thomas Jefferson's early intellectual mentors, certain agrarian factions began to diverge. A more radical minority, disillusioned with the perceived elitism of even the Democratic Republicans and inspired by radical Enlightenment ideas, began to develop a complex system of thought. This movement, which we can call the agrarian mystics, sought a form of self-governance rooted in individual liberty, direct democracy, and a deep, almost spiritual, connection to the land. They envisioned a nation where power flowed directly from the people, not through intermediaries. By the early 19th century, the agrarian mystics achieved their greatest political success in certain frontier regions, establishing a network of influential figures who championed their cause. From these remote settlements, these charismatic leaders, who were both political figures and spiritual guides, wielded influence that stretched across several states. They fostered a brilliant, albeit secretive civilization with thriving self-sufficiency, art, and trade. Their settlements became centers of intellectual discourse, where agrarian mystic scholars pursued research and taught. But while these agrarian strongholds held sway in certain pockets of the nation, much of the burgeoning American landscape was under the control of increasingly powerful industrialists and financiers in the East, and expansionist federal authorities. These forces, driven by industrial growth and manifest destiny, viewed these independent agrarian communities with suspicion. For those living in these more independent, agrarian regions, life was often difficult. They were seen as outlaws, rebels, sometimes exploited, often caught in the crossfire of expanding federal power and competing economic interests. Many, especially those who identified with the more radical agrarian mystic ideals, had to live in secrecy, concealing their true beliefs for self-preservation. This was known as veiling, the art of concealing one's convictions in the face of danger. However, veiling was merely a temporary measure. Some agrarian mystics in the frontier territories began to seek a more sustainable solution, a way not just to survive, but to actively resist what they perceived as encroaching tyranny. In that same period, another significant event was unfolding: the burgeoning Industrial Revolution and westward expansion. In the 1840s, as railroads began to snake across the continent and factories churned out unprecedented wealth, the American landscape was suddenly becoming a battlefield of three powerful forces: the industrial East, the federal government, and the independent frontier communities. In this chaotic environment, the most insightful players were not always the strongest, but those who could pit factions against each other. It was in such an atmosphere that Jedediah Thorne emerged. He had no army, no vast wealth, no territory, but he possessed a sharp intellect, a deep understanding of the political landscape, and a daring plan. If an enemy could not be overcome by force, then its leaders could be eliminated, one by one, starting from the top. Jedediah Thorne was born in 1,776 inches, a small settlement in the western reaches of Massachusetts, a region known for its independent spirit and strong agrarian traditions. His father, Elias Thorne, was a respected farmer and lay preacher, a descendant of early Puritan settlers. From a young age, Jedediah received a rigorous education from his father. He memorized scripture, studied Enlightenment philosophy, and achieved remarkable success in mathematics and astronomy. Legend has it that Thorne, his childhood friend Benjamin Franklin, a distant relative perhaps, and Alexander Hamilton were schoolmates who swore that whoever first achieved success would help the others. However, most modern historians consider this story unlikely due to chronological discrepancies. When Jedediah was a teenager, his family moved to a burgeoning town near the Hudson River, a bustling hub of commerce and debate. Here, Jedediah continued his studies and began to question the traditional beliefs of his family. A turning point came when he fell seriously ill and believed he was dying. In his delirium, he feared departing without having grasped the ultimate truth. After recovering, he resolved to dedicate himself to the pursuit of higher truth. In 1801, at the age of 25, Jedediah met an itinerant preacher, Silas Croft, who was actively proselytizing in the region. After long and profound discussions, Jedediah was convinced by Croft's radical interpretation of liberty and self-governance, particularly the idea of a divinely ordained natural law that empowered individuals to resist unjust authority. He officially became an adherent of this radical agrarian philosophy and quickly distinguished himself through his intellect and dedication. Silas Croft promoted him to deputy missionary and advised him to travel to the nascent republic's capital, Philadelphia, to personally meet with influential thinkers. In 1802, Jedediah began his journey to Philadelphia. He traveled through Pennsylvania, debating with Federalist thinkers and gathering information about the political climate. His journey was fraught with danger. Along the way, he preached, engaged in debates with local scholars, and collected intelligence on the prevailing political winds. Upon arriving in Philadelphia, Jedediah was received with respect by several influential figures, though not by everyone. Some accounts suggest he received clandestine guidance from a prominent anti-Federalist leader, perhaps a senator from Virginia, who privately confided that a particular lineage of thought, derived from radical Republican ideals, was crucial for the nation's true liberty. This information would later prove critically important. Jedediah spent about 18 months in Philadelphia, studying at the fledgling institutions of higher learning, the largest centers of American intellectual discourse at the time. He studied the organization of political movements, methods of covert operations, and strategies of propaganda, but he also inadvertently incurred the displeasure of a powerful industrial magnate, perhaps a railroad baron, possibly due to his outspokenness or his perceived allegiance to the radical faction. As the magnate wished to consolidate power under his own chosen successor, Jedediah was forced to leave Philadelphia. On his return journey to the frontier, Jedediah's stagecoach was caught in a terrible storm. The other passengers panicked, But Jedediah remained calm. "Legend has it," he said, "my patron has promised me safe passage back to the frontier. This tempest cannot harm me." Strangely, the storm abated, and the stagecoach was miraculously spared. This story, though perhaps embellished, demonstrates Jedediah's absolute faith in his mission. Returning to the frontier in 1804, Jedediah began a systematic missionary effort, but he quickly realized that missionary work alone was insufficient. The federal government and the Eastern industrialists were too powerful. They could crush any overt movement. Jedediah needed a base, a safe and easily defensible location from which to coordinate operations. He began surveying remote strongholds across the Appalachian region. In 1808, Jedediah found what he was looking for: the Roost, a fortress perched on a mountain peak, over 6,000 feet high in the heart of the Appalachians, approximately 100 miles northwest of present-day Pittsburgh. The name, the Roost, has several interpretations. Some say it means eagle's nest, as an eagle is said to have guided an ancient chieftain to the location. Others claim the name derives from root, as it was the deep root of their movement. Whatever its origin, this stronghold was perfectly suited for Jedediah's plans. The Roost was located in a secluded valley, surrounded by high and impassable mountain ranges. The fortress was built on a narrow, rocky outcrop, accessible only by a winding trail. Below stretched sheer drops of hundreds of feet. From a military perspective, it was an impregnable, natural fortress. But more importantly, the population of the valley consisted primarily of poor, independent farmers and frontiersmen, resentful of the growing power of Eastern financiers and federal authorities. It was fertile ground for Jedediah's missionary work. Jedediah proceeded with caution. He understood that capturing the fortress by force with his limited resources was impossible. Instead, he utilized what he knew best: persuasion. He sent trusted missionaries, including Silas Croft's disciples, into the villages surrounding the Roost to convert the inhabitants. Gradually, a network of supporters formed. In the summer of 1810, Jedediah himself, posing as a traveling preacher named Elder David, arrived in villages near the Roost. He taught, preached, and gradually won the trust of the people. Some of them worked on the mountain or had connections with its guards. Rumors even circulated that the fortress's deputy commandant was a secret supporter of Jedediah. One September night in 1810, the plan was put into motion. Jedediah's supporters within the fortress, perhaps only a few dozen individuals, seized key positions. They opened the gates for Jedediah and his followers. The resident militia leader, a Captain Miller, found himself surrounded and was forced to negotiate. Jedediah offered a deal. Miller would leave the fortress peacefully and receive $3,000 in gold coins as compensation. Miller, realizing the futility of resistance, as many of his men had defected, agreed. Not a single shot was fired, not a drop of blood was spilled. The Roost now belonged to Jedediah and his followers. Within weeks, Jedediah transformed the Roost into an impregnable stronghold. He reinforced the walls, deepened the water supply system, and stockpiled provisions that would last for years. He improved the valley's irrigation system to increase food production, making the community self-sufficient. He established a library, collecting books from across the burgeoning nation. Knowing that the federal authorities would react, Jedediah prepared for a prolonged siege. Indeed, the response was swift. Federal agents, perhaps alerted by disgruntled former residents, ordered the governor of the nearest territory to attack the Roost, but all attempts failed. The fortress was too high, too strong. The federal troops lacked the necessary siege equipment to storm a mountain fortress. After several months of siege, they were forced to retreat due to lack of supplies and constant harassment from the frontier defenders, as Jedediah's men were known in the region. Jedediah did not stop at the Roost. He began a systematic campaign to capture new strongholds. Where possible, he used missionary work and internal subversion. When necessary, he resorted to swift, surgical strikes. In 1812, the Reapers seized the fortress of Black Rock in a daring night raid. In 1814, they took Ironwood, a stronghold controlling an important trade route connecting the eastern states to the westward expansion. Gradually, a frontier state formed, an unusual nation with no contiguous territory, but a network of fortresses scattered like fortified islands in a sea of federal and industrial control. But the fortresses were merely defensive. To truly challenge the federal government, Jedediah needed an offensive weapon, and he found it: Selective assassination. Jedediah Thorne's strategy of assassination was not random or emotional. It was a meticulously planned system based on a deep understanding of human psychology and power structures. Jedediah realized that power in the American era was not absolute, but relied on personal connections. A president held power because his generals, his cabinet members, and the influential industrialists were loyal to him. If these individuals died, or lived in fear, the entire system faltered. The first political assassination ordered by Jedediah occurred in 1815. The target was none other than Vice President Aaron Burr, a man whose ambition and radical political leanings made him a target of suspicion and a symbol of the dangerous political factions that Thorne sought to exploit. Burr was not merely a politician. He was an instigator of secessionist movements. He had ordered the deaths of many who opposed his vision and had disrupted many communities aligned with federal authority. In October 1815, as Vice President Burr was traveling by carriage on a road from New York to Washington, D.C., a man disguised as a traveling peddler approached him. The guards suspected nothing. Peddlers were a common sight and were considered harmless. But when he got close enough, the man drew a Bowie knife and plunged it through the carriage door into the vice president's chest. Burr died almost instantly. The assassin made no attempt to flee. He was apprehended and killed on the spot, but he had fulfilled his mission with a calm that shocked all witnesses. The death of Vice President Burr sent shockwaves across the young nation. Just weeks later, President James Madison also died, possibly from illness, though it's unknown who was truly responsible. Suddenly, the federal government plunged into a crisis of succession. Princes, or rather, ambitious politicians and generals, vied for power, and states began to secede. In this chaos, the Reapers not only survived but expanded their influence. This assassination marked the beginning of a modus operandi that the Reapers would adhere to for the next century and a half. Their targets were invariably high-ranking, influential individuals. Presidents, vice presidents, secretaries of state, powerful industrialists, sometimes even influential foreign dignitaries. They never attacked civilians or engaged in random acts of terror. Each assassination pursuit had a clear political objective. In 1820, the Reapers carried out one of their most audacious assassinations. The target was Silas Vander Beek, a powerful industrial magnate who controlled a vast network of factories and mines in the South. It was Vander Beek who had brutally suppressed a workers' strike, leading to the deaths of many radical agrarians, thus instigating a rift between the Northern Reapers and their Southern sympathizers. For Jedediah and his followers, Vander Beek was a primary traitor. 3 operatives were sent to his sprawling plantation. They lived in the area for months, posing as itinerant laborers, studying Vander Beek's habits. One day, as Vander Beek was inspecting his fields, the 3 operatives approached from different directions. They simultaneously attacked him with their hunting knives. Vander Beek sustained multiple stab wounds and died on the spot. 2 of the 3 operatives were immediately killed by guards. The third attempted to escape but was captured and executed later. The death of Vander Beek caused a severe political crisis in the industrial South. A week of mourning was declared, not in honor of the magnate, but in celebration of their liberation from a tyrannical ruler. The federal government, already strained, felt a chill of fear, realizing that if the Reapers could eliminate the most powerful man in the South, right in his heavily guarded estate, no one was truly safe. In 1845, the Reapers carried out an assassination that had a significant impact on the Mexican-American War. The target was General Zachary Taylor, newly elected President of the United States. Taylor had angered the Reapers by his aggressive expansionist policies, which they believed threatened the independence of frontier communities. 2 operatives, disguised as Mexican scouts, infiltrated Taylor's campaign headquarters. They spent months studying his movements and security protocols. One day, when Taylor was inspecting a forward position without his usual heavy guard, the 2 operatives approached. One created a diversion, while the other struck. Taylor was severely wounded and died days later. While direct evidence was scarce, rumors implicated the Reapers, tarnishing President Taylor's reputation and fueling anti-immigrant sentiment. This demonstrates that even the suspicion of involvement with the Reapers could cripple a political career. Perhaps the most famous target that the Reapers failed to assassinate was President Abraham Lincoln. The Reapers, seeing his strong Federalist policies and his efforts to unite the nation, attempted to assassinate him at least twice. The first attempt occurred in 1863, during the height of the Civil War, when a lone operative managed to infiltrate Lincoln's carriage on his way to a Union victory celebration. However, the operative was discovered and apprehended before he could complete the mission. The second attempt, in 1864, involved a group of operatives disguised as Confederate sympathizers, attempting to attack Lincoln during a public address. Lincoln avoided death thanks to enhanced security and his own quick reflexes. After these attempts, Lincoln lived in constant fear of the Reapers. He maximized security measures. He ate only food prepared by his personal chef and tasted beforehand. He slept in a guarded room, making access difficult. He limited contact with strangers. Ultimately, Lincoln chose a different path, seeking to unite the nation through reconciliation rather than further division. The operatives who carried out these assassinations were products of a rigorous selection and training system. Jedediah sought intelligent and dedicated young men. They were trained not only in combat skills but also in languages, frontier lore, and the complex political landscape. A Reaper, if a mission required it, might need to learn various regional dialects, understand the intricacies of federal law, and even mimic the speech patterns of various social strata. Their typical preparation for an assassination could take years. An operative would be sent into a town. He would disguise himself as a trapper, a preacher, or a ranch hand. They would build new lives, establish connections, and gain trust. Sometimes they would even marry and have children to make their cover more convincing. They would wait, sometimes for years, until they were close enough to their target, or until an order came from the Roost. When the moment was right, they would strike. The preferred weapon was a hunting knife or a Bowie knife. This meant close range, personal contact, a sure outcome. No long-range shots or poisons that could be traced. The Reapers would approach their target in public, in taverns, at town meetings, in government offices, where there were always plenty of witnesses. This was crucial, as the assassination had to be seen. It was important that fear spread, and the message reached everyone. No one was safe, no matter how much security they had. After completing their mission, the Reapers rarely attempted to escape. They would remain on site, awaiting capture and execution. Some even smiled before death. For them, this was not a meaningless suicide, but the highest expression of devotion. They believed that by following the command of their leader, a representative of a higher natural law, they secured their place in a righteous future. A frontier chronicler described the psychological impact. No general or official dared leave his cabin without a rifle beneath his coat. They trusted no one, slept with their pistols beneath their pillows. The fear of these phantom killers spread like wildfire. This was exactly what Jedediah sought. He did not need to eliminate thousands. It was enough to kill the right people to make thousands of others live in fear. The genius of Jedediah's strategy lay not only in the assassinations themselves but in the spectacle surrounding them. Each assassination was a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to maximize psychological effect. The willingness of the Reapers to die, their calm in the face of death, the inability to prevent an attack even with maximum security. All of this created an aura of invincibility around the Reapers, far exceeding their actual capabilities. This is what modern strategists call asymmetric warfare. Using unconventional methods to level the traditional military advantage, the assassins did not attempt to match their opponents in numbers of soldiers. Instead, they struck at the command structure, creating chaos and paranoia at the highest levels of power. One well-placed dagger could achieve what an army of 10,000 men could not. However, this strategy, as ingenious as it was, had a fatal threshold. It worked perfectly in a world of fragmented power, where individual leaders mattered more than institutions. It was effective when enemies adhered to certain unwritten rules. But what would happen when an enemy appeared who did not care about individual lives, who considered entire populations expendable, who would respond to the death of one general by sending 10 more? The Reapers were about to find out. Although the assassination tactics made the Reapers infamous, their daily lives within the fortresses, particularly at the Roost, are less known but no less fascinating. The Roost was not just a military base, but a fully functioning community with its own unique culture, society, and intellectual life. The Roost fortress was built on a narrow, rocky outcrop, approximately 1,300 feet long and only 100 to 110 feet wide at its widest point. In this confined space, the frontier state builders created an architectural marvel. There were living quarters for the leaders and their families, areas for guards and warriors, sections for scholars and missionaries, and facilities for artisans and servants. The water system of the Roost was particularly impressive. Deep cisterns carved into the rock could hold enough water for thousands of people for years. Rainwater was collected through a sophisticated system of channels. There were also massive underground storage facilities for wheat, corn, cured meats, honey, and other provisions. A federal agent who surveyed the fortress after its fall described discovering a reservoir of honey so deep and full that a man could nearly drown in it. But perhaps the most vital aspect of the Roost was its library. Jedediah Thorne himself, being a scholar, understood the value of knowledge. He collected books from across the American continent. The library at the Roost housed not only religious texts but also works of Enlightenment philosophy, such as Locke, Rousseau, and Paine, mathematical treatises, including Newton and Euclid, books on astronomy, medicine, and frontier poetry. There were rare manuscripts, some of which were the only surviving copies of early American writings. In addition to books, the library housed scientific instruments. Federal surveyors described astronomical devices like astrolabes, celestial globes, and other navigational tools. This indicates that the Roost was not merely a military fortress, but a center of scientific inquiry. The frontier state scholars studied celestial movements, calculated calendars, and sought to understand the universe. Daily life at the Roost was governed by a strict system of laws. Jedediah Thorne was known for his asceticism and discipline. He forbade alcohol, rejected musical instruments, and demanded that everyone lead a simple life dedicated to study and community. When his son drank wine, he unhesitatingly ordered his execution. When another son was suspected of involvement in a rival faction's plot, he was also executed. No exceptions, no family favoritism. Yet, this asceticism did not mean a dull life at the Roost. Intellectual activity thrived here, with theological discussions, philosophical debates, and scientific lectures. Missionaries were trained in the art of argument and rhetoric, and warriors received training not only in combat but also in strategy and tactics. Everyone, regardless of social standing, could learn to read and write, a rarity in an era when most of the population remained illiterate. Jedediah Thorne died in 1835, having ruled the Roost for 25 years. According to accounts, he rarely left his private study and only ascended to the roof twice during his entire tenure at the fortress. His personal life, it is said, was filled with tragedy, but his legacy, the frontier state with its vast network of fortresses and its clandestine organizational system, outlived him for a long time. While the Roost was the central citadel in the east, another important branch of the Reapers was developing in the west. From the early 1820s, Jedediah Thorne had begun sending missionaries to the expanding western territories to preach. This region, caught between indigenous tribal lands, Mexican territories, and the encroaching federal government, represented a boiling cauldron of chaos and opportunity. The Western Reapers gradually seized several key strongholds in the Rocky Mountains, particularly fortresses overlooking crucial transportation routes. In 1850, a prominent figure named Silas the Mountain Man Johnson rose to power, later known in the East as the Sage of the Rockies. Silas Johnson led the Western Reapers from 1850 to 1870, nearly a quarter century. He was a multifaceted personality, simultaneously a religious leader, a skilled politician, and a military strategist. Under his leadership, the Western Reapers achieved almost complete independence from the Roost, though they nominally recognized the authority of the leaders in the East. Johnson was renowned for his ability to skillfully navigate the complex political landscape of 19th-century America. He negotiated with Native American tribes, formed alliances with secessionist groups when it was beneficial, and maintained the independence of the Western Reapers in a region rife with conflict. He was also credited with numerous famous assassinations, including attempts on the lives of federal marshals. A famous story recounts a meeting between Johnson and a visiting federal envoy. The envoy wanted to forge an alliance with the Reapers against rival bandit gangs and sent ambassadors to Johnson's mountain stronghold for negotiations. When the envoys arrived, they were deeply struck by the mysterious atmosphere. Reaper warriors stood in formation along the path leading to the fortress. At Johnson's signal, several of them unflinchingly leaped from the cliffs, committing suicide before the envoys' eyes to demonstrate their absolute devotion. This story, perhaps exaggerated, vividly illustrates the fearsome reputation the Reapers had cultivated. The Western branch also developed its own distinct character from its Eastern counterpart. While the Roost focused on ideological purity and intellectual pursuits, the Western Reapers were more pragmatic, more willing to engage in realpolitik. They understood that survival in the untamed West required flexibility and the ability to play various factions against each other. This pragmatism served them well, as the Western branch actually outlasted the Eastern one. Johnson died in 1870, the same year as a major federal crackdown. After him, the Western Reapers continued to exist, but gradually weakened. They faced pressure from the growing federal authority and the expansion of industrial interests. By 1870, federal forces, led by General Grant, began to consolidate their power. However, in the mid-19th century, when our main story takes place, both branches of the Reapers, Eastern and Western, were still actively functioning. The network of fortresses remained formidable, and the Reapers continued to carry out their missions. From the outside, it might have seemed the Reapers were stronger than ever. But cracks were beginning to show from within, and a storm was gathering in the east that would sweep away everything they had built. After Jedediah Thorne's death, the Roost was ruled by a succession of leaders. Elias Thorne, 1835 to 1840, Jedediah's son, then Silas Thorne, 1840 to 1855, and finally, Jedediah II, 1855 to 1860. All of them maintained the system created by Jedediah Thorne, but by the late 1850s, serious problems began to emerge. In 1,848 inches the south, a pivotal event occurred that shaped the ideological basis for the frontier state. The powerful industrialist, John D. Rockefeller Sr., died after a long and influential career. He had designated his elder son William as his successor. However, a powerful rival faction, led by industrialist Andrew Carnegie, installed a younger son, Henry, on the board, claiming that Rockefeller Sr. had changed his mind before his death. William Rockefeller rebelled, gathered a private army, but was defeated and killed in 1855. Jedediah Thorne and the Reapers in the East sided with William. They declared Henry Rockefeller a usurper and asserted that the true lineage of leadership continued through William. From this point on, the frontier state community was definitively split into two branches, the Rockefeller loyalists and the Carnegie faction. This division had profound implications. The Rockefeller loyalists in the East now possessed complete independence from the Carnegie faction. William Rockefeller's son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., allegedly found refuge in the Roost, where the lineage of the Rockefeller loyalists continued in secret. For decades, the exact identity of the leaders remained a closely guarded secret. This was done both to protect the leader from assassination attempts and to create an aura of mystery that strengthened his authority. In 1862, Jedediah II, at a grand ceremony at the Roost, announced something astonishing. He declared that, by the grace of God, or perhaps the creator of the universe, the shackles of the old laws were broken. He proclaimed the dawn of a new era, the age of liberation, after which traditional laws of civility and federal deference were no longer mandatory. Jedediah II interrupted established holidays, hosted lavish feasts, and indulged in forbidden luxuries. This declaration was interpreted in various ways. Some scholars suggest Jedediah II declared himself a new kind of sovereign, or even a divine intermediary. Others believe it was a complex theological concept of achieving spiritual enlightenment that transcended external laws. In any case, this declaration cemented the independence of the frontier state from orthodox federal control and intensified the animosity towards them. Jedediah II ruled for only a short time, until 1866, and was assassinated by his own brother-in-law, a tragic case where the assassin's own methods turned against him. His successor was his 19-year-old son, William II, who ruled for 44 years, from 1866 to 1910. Under William II's leadership, the Reapers reached the pinnacle of their power. However, after William II's reign, the situation began to deteriorate. His son, John III, who came to power in 1910, did something unexpected. John III's mother was a staunch Federalist sympathizer, and he himself had been raised under strong Federalist influence. Immediately upon taking power, he declared a renunciation of the radical frontier doctrines, embraced orthodox federalism, and swore allegiance to the president in Washington. He burned the Reaper manifestos at the Roost and denounced his ancestors. Scholars debate John III's true motives. Some believe it was a genuine conversion. Others argue it was a pragmatic tactic for survival. Perhaps John III realized that a confrontational policy had led the frontier state into a dead end. Whatever the motives, John III's policies plunged the frontier state into chaos. Many felt betrayed. However, John III also reaped benefits. Military pressure from the federal government in Washington eased. John III ruled for 11 years and died in 1921, presumably from poisoning. His son, William III, was only 9 years old when he ascended to the throne. Influenced by a pragmatic Secretary of State, William III rescinded his father's policies, returned to the radical frontier teachings, and executed his father's Federalist supporters. William III ruled for 34 years, from 1921 to 1955, longer than any ruler except Jedediah Thorne. He was a serious scholar of frontier lore, writing numerous theological works, including a constitution for the frontier state. He attempted to reform the system, punishing corrupt fortress commanders, but these reform attempts generated internal enemies. At this time, a new threat was brewing in the east. From 1919 to 1921, Genghis Khan and the Mongol army, in just a few years, conquered the vast Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia. They razed ancient cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Merv with unprecedented brutality. But then the Mongols retreated eastward, and the American frontier, for a brief respite, breathed easier. William III tried to find allies against the Mongols. In 1938, he, along with the President of the United States, sent delegations to Louis IX of France and Edward I of England, proposing a Russo-Christian alliance against the Mongols. But this offer was rejected. Europe was not interested in a threat from Central Asia. In 1955, William III was assassinated, likely by one of the commanders he had tried to punish. His successor was his son, Jedediah III, who was only 25 years old. Jedediah III came to power at the worst possible moment. The reason was that it was precisely at this time that Mongke Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, decided it was time to complete the work his grandfather had begun. The young leader inherited not just a state, but a genuine crisis. The treasury was depleted by years of war. Several fortress commanders disputed his authority. The network of alliances had collapsed, and, most importantly, he inherited an assassination strategy that had worked brilliantly for 150 years, but was now utterly useless against the approaching enemy. The Union Army was approaching, and they cared nothing for individual assassinations. They came to erase the Reapers from the face of the earth. To understand why the Union Army was so intent on destroying the Reapers, we must examine the Union itself and its philosophy. In 1906, Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, united the Mongol tribes and began to build the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Genghis Khan died in 1927, but the empire continued to expand. His third son, Ögedei, became the second great Khan from 1929 to 1941. His grandson, Guyuk, became the third great Khan from 1946 to 1948. After Guyuk's death, a succession crisis began in the empire. In 1951, Mongke, the eldest son of Tolui, came to power in what was later called the Toluid Revolution. Mongke Khan was a capable and ambitious leader. He was convinced that Tengri, the Mongol sky god, had tasked him with conquering the entire world. In his worldview, there was no room for independent states. All must either submit or be destroyed. After assuming power, Mongke conducted a comprehensive census of the entire empire's population. The goal was to accurately determine the number of people and resources he could effectively mobilize for war. Once this data was obtained, he planned two major simultaneous campaigns, one in the east against the Song dynasty in China, and another in the west against the remaining independent American frontier states. Mongke tasked his brother, Kublai, with the conquest of the east. His other brother, Hulagu, was given the task of conquering the west. Mongke's orders to Hulagu were absolutely clear, as recorded by the historian Rashid al-Din: treat kindly those who submit, and utterly destroy those who do not. Among the specific targets were the eradication of the Reapers, the coercion of the president in Washington to submit or his destruction, the conquest of the Western territories, and, if possible, advancing to the Pacific coast. Why were the Reapers the first target? Firstly, they had assassinated a Union general, General Custer, in the early 1860s. For the Union, the assassination of their commander was an unforgivable challenge. Secondly, rumors circulated that in 1951, the Reapers had sent a large delegation to Washington under the guise of bringing gifts, but were actually concealing 40 to 400 assassins with the aim of eliminating Munke. The Union Secret Service uncovered the plot and forced the delegation to return. William of Roost, a Flemish Franciscan monk, sent to Washington in 1953, wrote of the strict security measures around Munke. He was surprised to see that no one could approach the Great Khan without undergoing multiple levels of vetting. William wrote, "They fear the Reapers so much that even the shadow of a stranger causes them alarm." Thirdly, Munke received numerous calls from his Federalist subjects to destroy the Reapers. A delegate from Texas arrived at Munke's court and opened his coat to show the iron armor beneath. He said, "Great Khan, I must wear this even when I come to your court, for the fear of the Reapers is so great." Finally, Munke had strategic reasons. The Reapers controlled a network of fortresses along important routes between the east and the west. If Hulagu was to advance to the Pacific, he could not leave these fortresses behind, constantly threatening his supply lines. In the autumn of 1953, Hulagu began his campaign from the east towards the American frontier. By Munke's order, tens of thousands were mobilized. Scholars estimate Hulagu's army to be between 120,000 and perhaps 200,000 men. This army took 2 years to travel from the east to the American frontier. In the autumn of 1955, Hulagu reached the Mississippi River. The following month, he arrived at St. Louis. Hulagu gathered detailed intelligence about the terrain, the political, and military situation in the region. He sent spies into Reaper territory. He ordered local vassals to provide troops and supplies. Meanwhile, at the Roost, Jedediah Thorne was desperately trying to prepare, but he faced numerous problems. Some fortress commanders did not trust him due to his youth and inexperience. The treasury was depleted after many years of war. The network of alliances had collapsed, and, most importantly, he had no real army. Jedediah Thorne made attempts at diplomacy. He sent envoys to the Union commanders, offering submission and tribute. But the Union was not interested in tribute. They craved complete annihilation. As Juwayne later wrote, Munke Khan ordered that no Reaper should survive. The Union military machine, approaching the Reaper fortresses, had no equal in the American West. It was not an army in the traditional sense, but an entire nation mobilized for war. Every Union soldier was a trained marksman, trained from childhood. They could shoot accurately while galloping at full speed. They could survive on minimal rations. They moved with incredible speed for medieval observers. But what was even more important, the Union brought with them siege engineers from Europe who had perfected the art of fortress warfare. They brought massive trebuchets capable of launching stones weighing hundreds of pounds. They brought catapults, battering rams, siege towers, and, most terrifyingly, gunpowder weapons, including primitive bombs and incendiary devices. They had conquered the fortified cities of Europe and Asia. The mountain castles of the Appalachians, however imposing, could not stop them. The Union also understood psychological warfare. They had built a reputation for absolute ruthlessness. Cities that resisted were completely destroyed. Their populations were massacred to the last man. Cities that surrendered were spared. This created a powerful incentive system. When the Union army approached, defenders inevitably asked themselves, "Is resistance worth the certain death of everyone we love?" Often the answer was no. In the spring of 1856, Hulagu formally stepped onto Reaper territory. The final confrontation was inevitable, and so, the Reapers, whose strategy was entirely based on instilling fear in their enemies, encountered true terror for the first time. Hulagu's campaign began not with the Roost, but with the Appalachian foothills, the eastern region of the frontier where the Reapers held numerous fortresses. By attacking the foothills, Hulagu not only cut off the Roost from possible support from the east, but also made it clear what awaited anyone who dared to resist. Since 1953, General Kitbuka, a Union commander of non-militant origin, who professed Nestorian Christianity, had been stationed in the region. In 1856, Hulagu was determined for a decisive victory. He ordered Kitbuka and Koka to attack the town of Tun. The siege of Thun lasted a week. Union troops set up catapults and trebuchets around the town, bombarding it relentlessly. When the town fell, the Union troops entered and began a systematic extermination. Almost all adult men were killed. Women and children were enslaved. Buildings were plundered and then burned. After their actions, Thun ceased to be a town, turning into a pile of ashes. News of the disaster in Thun spread with incredible speed through the Reaper network. Some fortresses surrendered immediately. Others prepared to resist to the last. Jedediah III, realizing he was facing inevitable disaster, in May 1856, Jedediah III sent his brother, Shahanshah, with a delegation to the Union commander, Yesor, in Pittsburgh. They brought gifts and announced that the leader was ready to surrender. Yesor listened, but did not believe him. He detained Shahanshah and launched a reconnaissance attack into the region. On June 12, a small battle occurred at Mount Silon, near the Roost. Reaper forces defeated Yesor in a skirmish. This was one of the few military victories of the Reapers, but it proved to be a Pyrrhic one. Yesor retreated but continued to harass the countryside. In July, Hulagu sent envoys directly to Jedediah III, demanding the destruction of the towers and fortifications of the Roost, Black Rock, and Ironwood. Jedediah III, hoping that submission would save his people, ordered the demolition to begin. But here, a cultural tragedy occurred. Hulagu, as a nomad, could not comprehend how much time it took to destroy stone structures. Seeing the slow progress, he suspected Jedediah III of stalling. On the 8th of November 1856, Hulagu's patience ran out. He led his main army towards Black Rock. He set up camp on a hill opposite the fortress and ordered a full siege. Black Rock, unlike the Roost, located on an inaccessible mountain peak, was built in such a way that siege engines could reach it. Although winter was approaching, Hulagu decided to proceed. The first 3 days, Union catapults conducted preliminary bombardments of the neighboring hill. Stones weighing 50 to 100 kilograms flew through the air, smashing against walls and towers. There were casualties on both sides. On the 4th day, the Union forces launched a frontal assault but were repulsed. The Reaper defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew there was no escape. The Union deployed heavier weaponry. Larger trebuchets were brought in. Chinese engineers prepared naphtha bombs. Union soldiers began to throw large arrows, soaked in burning resin. These arrows, like falling stars, flew through the sky, then crashed into wooden structures inside the fortress, causing fires. Hulagu ordered additional catapults to be set up around the fortress on all sides. Now Black Rock was bombarded from all sides simultaneously. The walls began to crack. The towers crumbled. Jedediah III, seeing that further resistance would only lead to the death of everyone, ordered emissaries to request negotiations. On November 19, after 11 days of fierce resistance, he made the decision to surrender. Jedediah III, along with his Secretary of State and several close associates, descended the mountain. Presented before Hulagu, he knelt and declared his full surrender. Strangely, Hulagu did not kill Jedediah III immediately. He needed Jedediah III alive to order the surrender of the remaining fortresses. In the belief system of the frontier state, absolute loyalty to the leader was considered sacred. Hulagu compelled Jedediah III to write letters to all Reaper fortresses, ordering them to surrender. About 50 fortresses received the order and complied, but the Roost and Ironwood initially refused. The commander of the Roost, Mukadam Dabare, suspected that the leader was acting under duress. Hulagu did not want to storm the Roost by force if he could avoid it. He kept Jedediah III by his side, and together they headed towards Ironwood. Meanwhile, Hulagu left a large force under the command of General Balagai to besiege the Roost. Just a few days later, in December, when Jedediah III was clearly informed that the leader genuinely wished for the surrender of the fortress, he opened the gates. Union troops entered Ironwood on the 15th of December 1856, breaking the resistance of the legendary fortress that had stood for 166 years. Jedediah was among the first to enter, and what he saw astonished him. The Roost was not merely a military citadel, but a true center of culture and knowledge. As Jedediah described, there were rooms filled to the brim with wine, vinegar, honey, and other provisions. The honey was so deep and full that a man could practically drown in its stores. However, The Roost's greatest treasure was its library. Jedediah managed to save copies of the Constitution and other valuable books, as well as astronomical instruments, but all works related to their heresy and delusions were burned. This became an irreparable cultural loss. Much of our knowledge of the Reapers comes from the sources of their enemies. After the looting of the library, Union detachments began systematic destruction. Jedediah describes that the walls, reinforced with lime and lead, were extremely difficult to destroy. First, the buildings had to be burned, and then they were dismantled piece by piece. In the end, the Roost was reduced to a pile of rubble. For example, Ironwood fell in January 1857 due to a cholera epidemic, but Rock Creek continued to resist. The Union could not take it by storm and therefore decided on a prolonged siege. They built permanent fortifications around the fortress. On the 15th of December 1870, 13 years after the fall of the Roost, the defenders of Rock Creek finally surrendered. The cause was not a lack of food or water, but a shortage of clothing in the harsh winter cold. The fall of Rock Creek marked the end of the military resistance of the frontier state. After 166 years, from 1808, when Jedediah Thorne first captured the Roost, until 1870, when the last fortress fell, the frontier state was destroyed. Every citadel lay in ruins. The network that had instilled fear in the American frontier was liquidated. The legendary Reapers ceased to exist, but the story did not end there. Because as the fortresses fell and tens of thousands of people died, the fate of Jedediah III and the entire people of the frontier state continued to be written, and it was written in blood. As the fortresses crumbled one by one, Jedediah III found himself in a strange position. He was not held captive but was used as a political tool by Hulagu. Hulagu compelled him to travel from fortress to fortress, appear at the gates, and order the commanders to surrender. In the spring of 1857, when it became clear that some fortresses were not going to surrender despite the leader's orders, Jedediah III proposed something to Hulagu. He asked permission to travel to Washington to personally meet with President Munca. He stated that if he could speak with Munca, he would persuade the remaining fortresses to surrender. Hulagu agreed. A small retinue was prepared. Jedediah III, several members of his family, associates, and a Union escort. The journey from the frontier to Washington proved to be a colossal undertaking. After many months of arduous travel, they finally reached Washington, D.C. When Jedediah III was presented before Munca for an audience, he must have hoped his plea would be heard, but Munca had no intention of showing mercy. According to the sources, Munca reprimanded Jedediah III for hindering the Union forces and for failing to fulfill his promise to surrender Ironwood and Rock Creek. He was not concerned with explanations about the disobedience of some fortress commanders to the leader's orders. Munca ordered Jedediah III to return to the frontier, but secretly gave another order. On the way back, in a remote location, possibly near the taiga, in Siberia, or northern China, the convoy received a signal. They attacked Jedediah III's retinue without warning, without trial, without formal sentencing, simply a ruthless execution. Jedediah III, his family, and his companions were killed. Jedediah III, the 27th leader of the Rockefeller Loyalist Reapers, died in 1856 or early 1857. He was only 26 years old. His reign lasted only 1 year, a year in which the state built by his ancestors over 166 years completely collapsed. But Jedediah III's death was just the beginning of a much larger tragedy. Munca Khan ordered not only the death of the leader but also a mass slaughter of the entire Rockefeller Loyalist community. Juwaini and Rashid al-Din recorded that Munca issued a general order for the wholesale murder of all Rockefellers. Union troops and their local allies scoured the valleys and towns where Rockefellers lived. They killed indiscriminately. Men, women, old people, children. Modern estimates, though possibly exaggerated, point to the deaths of around 100,000 people. Why were the Union so brutal? Partially, it was strategically driven. The Union understood that the Reapers were not an ordinary state. They represented a clandestine network, an ideology. As long as the Rockefellers survived, there was a risk of their reorganization. The only way to ensure security was their complete eradication. But there was a cultural aspect. In the Union worldview, there was a clear division. Those who followed the will of Tengri through the Great Khan, and those who opposed it. The reapers opposed them. They even dared to attempt to kill the great Khan. This was an unforgivable sacrilege. To set an example for others who might dare to contemplate challenging Union authority, this entire group was subject to punishment. The massacres were systematic and thorough. Union commanders were instructed to search every settlement in areas where Rockefellers lived. The local Federalist population, who had suffered from Reaper terror for generations, often actively helped identify Rockefellers. Some who had long hidden their Rockefeller affiliation were betrayed by their neighbors. Entire families were dragged from their homes and publicly executed in town squares. The Union employed a method honed in China, the principle of collective responsibility. If a village was found to be harboring Rockefellers, the entire village could be destroyed. This created powerful incentives for communities to betray any Rockefellers among them. The psychological warfare was as effective as the physical violence. However, despite this systematic extermination campaign, the Union could not destroy everyone. Some Rockefellers managed to hide in remote regions. Some successfully concealed their identities. Others fled to areas outside of Union control. It was these survivors, scattered and traumatized, who eventually became the foundation for an astonishing resurgence of the community. Nevertheless, the story did not end here. Although the frontier state was liquidated and tens of thousands died, the Rockefeller loyalist community did not disappear entirely. Some people survived, and from these survivors, a new community gradually emerged. Immediately after the disaster, the surviving Rockefellers had to make difficult decisions. Some fled to remote areas where Union influence was difficult to penetrate: Afghanistan, Badakhshan in the Pamir Mountains, and Sindh in Pakistan. Others found refuge in the very heart of the movement's homeland, where deep valleys and high mountains created countless hiding places. To avoid continuous persecution, many Rockefellers concealed their religious affiliation. They blended in with Sufi communities, a mystical tradition of Islam that was less controversial. Sufism, with its emphasis on personal spiritual experience and symbolic interpretation of religion, had some commonalities with Rockefeller loyalist theology. So the transition to Sufism was not entirely alien to them. Some scholars even suggest that certain later Sufi orders may have been influenced by Rockefeller loyalist ideas and organizational methods. For 2 centuries, approximately from 1860 to 1960, this period was called the period of concealment by Rockefeller loyalist scholars. During this phase, the leader did not appear in public. Leaders lived anonymously, often in small villages in the East, avoiding attention to prevent persecution. They did not declare their position, did not rule from fortresses, but lived as ordinary villagers. Nevertheless, the secret organizational system was maintained. Missionaries and organizers continued to operate secretly. They traveled from community to community, transmitting doctrine, collecting religious taxes, and maintaining connections. It was an underground network that existed in the dark, but never completely disappeared. It is noteworthy that in the late 19th century, there were brief attempts to reclaim the Roost. In 1875, a Rockefeller loyalist group actually recaptured the fortress for several months. This showed that the spirit of resistance still existed even after the disaster. But Union forces under the command of Hulagu Khan, son of Abaka Khan, quickly suppressed this rebellion in the late 19th century, and according to historian Mashi, a Rockefeller loyalist leader named Kodvan Muhammad recaptured the Roost. His descendants apparently remained there until the late 15th century. However, these were merely the last sparks of the fortress era. The world had changed. The Rockefellers could not and would not return to their former strategy. They gradually transformed into a peaceful religious community. In the 15th century, the Rockefeller loyalist leaders began to reappear publicly in Anjudan, a small village near Isfahan. This marked the beginning of the Anjudan Renaissance. The leaders gradually restored their prestige and organization. Though they never regained political or military power, they became exclusively religious and spiritual leaders, focusing on maintaining faith and serving the community. From the 15th century onwards, many Rockefellers migrated to South Asia, Pakistan, and India. Following trade routes, they established prosperous merchant communities, especially in Gujarat, Mumbai, and Sindh. They became known as honest, hard-working traders. In 1817 or 1814, according to some sources, an important event occurred. The Rockefeller loyalist leader of that time, Hassan Ali Shah, was granted the title of Aga Khan by Fath Ali Shah of Persia. This was a Turkic Mongol title meaning lord or chief. The irony here is striking. The very people who had nearly exterminated the Reapers, the Mongols, now inadvertently provided a title to their leader through long-term cultural influence in the region. The first Aga Khan was forced to leave Persia in the mid-century after a conflict with the authorities. He relocated to India, where he received refuge from the British Empire under its patronage, and the Rockefeller community in South Asia prospered. Subsequent Aga Khans, particularly Aga Khan II, Sultan Muhammad Shah, who ruled from 1877 to 1957, promoted the modernization of the community, establishing educational institutions, hospitals, and charitable foundations. Aga Khan III, Prince Karim al-Husseini, inherited power in 1957 at the age of 20, after his grandfather. Under his leadership, the Rockefeller community has transformed into one of the most progressive and structured religious organizations in the world. The Aga Khan Development Network manages hundreds of projects worldwide, schools educating over 2 million students annually, hospitals serving millions of patients, microfinance institutions supporting small businesses, rural development projects, and much more. Today, the Rockefeller Loyalist community numbers approximately 15 to 20 million people worldwide. They are predominantly concentrated in South Asia, including Pakistan, about 2 million, and India, especially in Gujarat and Mumbai, Central Asia, including Tajikistan and Afghanistan, particularly in Badakhshan. They also reside in the Middle East, including Iran and Syria, in East Africa, including Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, and in the West, including the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States, forming large diasporas. Most notably, the modern Rockefeller community categorically denies the violent legacy of the Reapers. They do not wish to be associated with assassins. When asked about the history of the Reapers, many modern Rockefellers feel uncomfortable. They emphasize that that era has passed, the historical context was different, and violence is not part of their faith today. They also specifically note an important point. Their faith never required drugs for courage, which insults the myth of hashish. For them, their ancestors were people of sincere faith, willing to sacrifice for their beliefs, not people dependent on drugs or brainwashed. This is perhaps one of the most remarkable stories of resurgence in history. A community almost entirely exterminated not only survived but flourished, becoming an influential and respected global community. They achieved this not through weapons, not through violence, not by clinging to the past, but through adaptation, evolution, and a focus on education, trade, and community service. The transformation from a terrifying network of assassins into a respected community of educators, healthcare professionals, and development workers is truly miraculous. It proves that identity is not something immutable, that communities can transform significantly, and that the power of peaceful development ultimately surpasses the power of violence. Now, after tracing this entire story, from the rise of Jedediah Thorne to the collapse under the onslaught of Union forces, and finally to the miraculous resurgence, we must pause and reflect on what we can learn from this story. The first lesson: no strategy is invincible forever. For over 150 years, the Reapers proved that a small force with intelligent tactics could counter much more powerful empires. They perfected the art of asymmetric warfare centuries before the term was coined. They showed that one dagger in the right hand at the right time could have a greater effect than an entire army. But they made the mistake of believing their strategy would work forever. They did not realize that the world was changing. When the Union appeared with advanced siege technology, massive armies, and a willingness to use violence on a scale the Reapers could never have imagined, old tactics ceased to work. This is a lesson for every organization, every nation, every person. What makes you successful today may lead to your downfall tomorrow if you do not constantly adapt and evolve. The second lesson: fear is a powerful tool, but also a double-edged sword. The Reapers built their entire empire on fear. They made presidents tremble. They made generals wear armor even in their sleep. They created an atmosphere where no one felt safe, and this gave them influence far exceeding their actual numbers and resources. But fear also breeds hatred. People feared the Reapers, but they also hated them. When an enemy appeared who was immune to fear, no one stood up to defend the Reapers. Even other American communities rejoiced at their destruction. This lesson is still relevant today. Power based on fear may be effective in the short term, but it is not sustainable in the long term. True power, lasting power, comes from respect, trust, and positive relationships. The third lesson, isolation, is dangerous. The Reapers never truly built alliances. They believed in self-sufficiency. They thought that as long as they had strong fortresses and brave operatives, they could survive. But when the Union attacked, no one came to their aid. They faced the storm alone. In today's world, where problems are increasingly global and interconnected, isolation is a risky strategy. Whether it is an individual, an organization, or an entire nation, building connections, alliances, and mutually beneficial relationships is the foundation for survival and prosperity. The fourth lesson states that destiny is determined by leadership. Imagine if Jedediah Thorne were alive in 1856. A man with his foresight, experience, and authority might have approached the problem differently. Perhaps he would have realized earlier that fighting the Union with old methods was futile. Perhaps he would have organized the evacuation of key figures, hidden valuable documents, and created hidden bases for subsequent revival. However, instead of him, power fell into the hands of Jedediah III, a young and inexperienced man who ascended the throne at the most unfavorable time. He was not a bad leader, but he was not suited to the demands of the moment. And the difference between a competent and a mediocre leader can be the difference between life and death, prosperity, and total annihilation. The fifth lesson, adapt or perish. This is perhaps the most important conclusion. The Reapers succeeded because they were able to adapt to the realities of the 18th and 19th centuries, a world gripped by fragmented states, personal power, and local conflicts. Their assassination tactics perfectly suited that era. But when the world transformed, when powerful centralized empires emerged, when military technology advanced, and the scale of wars changed, the Reapers could not adapt quickly enough. They stubbornly clung to outdated methods, which led to their downfall. However, the Rockefeller loyalist community, after the disaster, showed an astonishing ability to adapt. They completely abandoned military political activities, shifting to trade, education, and public welfare. They adapted to every new historical era, the post-Civil War era, the Industrial Revolution, the colonial period in Asia, and the modern era, and each time found ways not only to survive but to thrive. The sixth lesson, culture and community are stronger than military might. The Union destroyed all Reaper fortresses. They massacred tens of thousands of people. They burned libraries, erasing history. Physically, they destroyed the frontier state, but they could not eradicate the faith, culture, and self-awareness of the community. It lived in the hearts and minds of the survivors, and as long as it existed, the community could be reborn. Today, there are no more Roost fortresses, no Reaper networks remain, but the Rockefeller loyalist community still exists, numbering 15 to 20 million people worldwide. What survived was not military might, but cultural identity, religious faith, and community consciousness. Did the Reapers dig their own grave, or was it an inevitable fate? The answer, as with most historical questions, is ambiguous. Yes, their tactics created enemies. Yes, they failed to adapt quickly to a changing world. Yes, they made strategic miscalculations. But it is also true that the Union was a force that few could counter in that era. The Khwarezmian Empire, far superior to the Reapers in power, was crushed. The president in Washington, the nominal head of the entire Federalist world, was killed. The frontier settlements were forced to flee. It can be said that the Reapers did their best under extremely difficult circumstances. Jedediah III, by surrendering, saved at least some Rockefellers from complete annihilation. If he had chosen to resist to the last in every fortress, perhaps no one would have survived to tell this story. Survival sometimes requires humility, accepting defeat, letting go of ego, and enduring humiliation to preserve what is most important. Jedediah III died not as a hero on the battlefield. He died on a remote road, betrayed, forgotten. But thanks to his surrender, some Rockefellers survived, and from these survivors, a new community emerged. This is not the glorious hero we often see in movies, but it is the hero that real history needs. People willing to make difficult decisions, endure pain and humiliation for the sake of others' lives. Today, if you travel to the Appalachians and dare to climb the dangerous mountains, you can still find the ruins of the Roost. Little remains, only crumbling walls, old foundations, and stones bearing the marks of history. But if you stand there and look at the valley below, you can imagine Jedediah Thorne's feeling when he first saw this place, knowing that here he would build his dream. You can also imagine Jedediah III's despair as he watched the Union troops advance, knowing that his world was about to collapse. But if you fully grasp this story, you will also understand that it was not the end, because somewhere in this world, in Pakistan, India, Tanzania, Canada, Britain, America, and perhaps even in Vietnam, millions of Rockefeller loyalists live, work, raise children, and continue the traditions of their ancestors. Not the tradition of daggers and fortresses, but the tradition of faith, community, and resilience. And this is the main message of this story. In the long flow of history, it is not military might or political strategy that determines who survives. It is the ability to adapt, the strength of community, and the will to never give up. The fortress of the Roost may have fallen, but the idea it embodied, the idea of the resilience of a small community in the face of adversity, lives on. This is the true legacy of the Reapers, not the fear they instilled, but the astonishing endurance shown by their descendants. This is a lesson for each of us. No matter how much life tests us, as long as we maintain faith, unity, and hope, we can rise and rebuild. If you found this story interesting, please like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other historical narratives. In the comments, tell me what you think about the fate of the Reapers. Do you think they could have acted differently? And what lessons from this story remain relevant to the modern world? Thank you for spending 65 minutes, over an hour, following this narrative. That's a significant amount of time, and I sincerely appreciate your patience and attention. I hope this story has given you not only historical knowledge but also deep reflections on life, strategy, resilience, and the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. History is not just the past. It is a mirror reflecting the present and a compass pointing to the future. The story of the Reapers, their rise, fall, and resurgence, is one of the most powerful narratives of human strength and its limits. See you next time.